So, you want to own a billboard, not rent one, not buy an ad on one. Own one. The steel, the permit, the ground lease, the right to charge other people money for the privilege of being seen by strangers driving past at 65 miles an hour. The cheapest static billboard in America costs about $50,000 to build. A digital one, the kind with an LED screen that rotates 6 advertisers an hour, runs $150,000 to $500,000. And a premium board in a place like Times Square, if you could even find one for sale, would set you back somewhere between $500,000 and $25 million. But here is the number that should stop you. The entire out-of-home advertising industry in the United States pulled in $9.46 billion in 2025. That is a record. It was the 19th consecutive quarter of growth. And billboards, just the billboard segment alone, accounted for more than 70% of it. $9.5 billion a year. 4 rectangles. So how does a steel pole with a vinyl sheet on it generate that kind of money? Who actually owns them? Why is a piece of paper from a zoning office worth more than the structure itself? And why did one sitting president of the United States call the billboard industry, on tape, and I am paraphrasing here, the most selfish group of hogs he had ever seen? Let's start with the money. If you want to buy advertising space on a billboard, the national average is about $4,000 for a 4-week cycle. That is the number most people know. But it is a meaningless average, because billboard pricing has nothing to do with the billboard and everything to do with where the billboard is standing. A static board on a rural highway might rent for $250 a month. A mid-sized city, $1,000 to $5,000. A major metro highway, $8,000 to $25,000. And a flagship board in Times Square, the Marriott Marquis screen, for example, can run anywhere from $250,000 to north of $2 million for 4 weeks. And here is the part that makes this a business worth owning. The thing generating that revenue is a steel pole, a concrete foundation, and either a vinyl sheet or an LED panel. It has no plumbing, no tenants, no HVAC system, no toilet that breaks at 2 in the morning. It just stands there and collects checks. A single well-placed static billboard can generate $3,000 to $60,000 a year in ad revenue. A digital board in a good location can pull $3,000 to $15,000 a month, because instead of one advertiser, you are rotating 6 or 8 of them per hour. Same pole, same dirt. 6 times the income. The typical expense ratio on a billboard's gross revenue is about 40%. That covers the ground lease, maintenance, insurance, electricity for digitals, and sales commissions, meaning 60% of what comes in is profit. Find me another asset class with a 60% margin that sits outside and does nothing. If you are ready to start, you need 3 things. You need land, you need a permit, and you need to understand that one of those things is worth infinitely more than the other. The land part works like this. You almost certainly do not own the dirt your billboard sits on. Almost nobody does anymore. You lease it. A billboard ground lease is a long-term agreement, typically 10 to 20 years, where you pay a landowner rent for the right to bolt a structure to their property. The standard industry formula is 15 to 20% of the billboard's net ad revenue. So if your sign brings in $20,000 a year in net revenue, you are paying the landowner $3,000 to $4,000. In Los Angeles, Chicago, or New York, that percentage can go as high as 50% because the rents are so much larger that there is more money to split. And if the landowner is smart, their lease has an escalator clause, 2 to 5% annual increases, or a CPI adjustment with a floor. If they did not negotiate one, they are subsidizing your business with their inflation. Now here is where most people get confused because they think the hard part is money. It is not. The hard part is the permit. A billboard permit is the single most important piece of paper in the outdoor advertising business. Without it, your structure is a code violation. With it, you have a legal right to charge money for eyeballs on a public road, and nobody else can build one next to you. And this is where the business gets interesting, because in most of America, you cannot get a new billboard permit. The supply is frozen. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Highway Beautification Act. It was Lady Bird Johnson's personal project, a law designed to clean up the visual clutter along America's interstate highways. The act regulated the size, spacing, and lighting of billboards within 660 feet of any federal aid highway, and it required states to maintain what it called effective control, or risk losing 10% of their federal highway funding. The intent was to limit billboards. What it actually did was lock them in, because the law mandated that any billboard removed from a federal highway had to be compensated at fair market value, not the cost of the steel, the value of the income stream. And that compensation had to come from federal funds. So the government created a law to remove billboards, then made removing them so expensive that nobody could afford to do it. By the late 1990s, federal funding for the program had essentially evaporated from the budget. One environmental group called it, decades after it passed, quote, little more than a billboard protection program. And they were not wrong. When the act passed, there were roughly 330,000 billboards along federal aid highways. Today, there are over 420,000. The law did not reduce billboards. It created a cartel. Because here is what the permit freeze means in practice. If your city has not issued a new billboard permit in 30 years, every existing permit is a scarce asset, and scarce assets appreciate. In places like Madison, Wisconsin, courts have found that the permit itself can be worth more than the physical structure it is attached to. You are not buying a sign, you are buying a slot in a closed system, the way a taxi medallion used to work in New York. That scarcity is the entire foundation of the business, and 3 companies control the majority of it. Lamar Advertising, founded in 1902, operates about 159,000 billboard displays across the United States, including roughly 5,500 digital boards. In 2025, Lamar reported net revenues of $2.27 billion. It is a REIT, a real estate investment trust, which means it pays out most of its taxable income as dividends, and it pays those dividends reliably because billboards do not have recessions the way other real estate does. 79% of Lamar's revenue comes from local advertising, not national brands, local car dealers, personal injury lawyers, and restaurants. The kind of businesses that never stop spending. Outfront Media holds about 21% of the U.S. market. Clear Channel Outdoor, roughly 18%. Together with Lamar, these 3 companies control about 2/3 of all out-of-home advertising revenue in the United States. The other third belongs to independents, small operators who own a handful of boards in a single market. And this is where it gets fun, because those independents are the entry point. If you want to own your first billboard, you are not building one. You are buying one that already exists, with the permit already in hand, the ground lease already signed, and the ad contracts already running. It is, in the words of one industry broker, a tiny net lease deal bolted to the best traffic your market has. You find these the way you find any off-market real estate deal. You call, you drive highways, you look at boards with no advertiser on them, or boards in slightly run-down condition, owned by some guy who inherited them from his father and does not want to deal with them anymore. You offer to take it off his hands. The valuation is straightforward. Take the net annual income, capitalize it at 8 to 10%, and that is your purchase price. A board making $14,000 a year in net income at a 9% cap rate is worth about $155,000. If you can buy it for less, you have a deal. If the seller wants more, you walk. Now, if you want to build from scratch, the economics change. A new static billboard costs $50,000 to $200,000 for the structure, foundation, and installation. A digital board costs $150,000 to $500,000 or more, depending on screen size, pixel resolution, and how much site prep and electrical work the location needs. Add permitting, which can take months or years if you even get approved. Add the ground lease negotiation. Add liability insurance, and, for digitals, somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000 a year in electricity. And then add the thing nobody warns you about, the zoning meeting. Because even if your state will theoretically issue a new billboard permit, your city probably will not. Los Angeles has not allowed new billboards in years. Houston banned them. Kansas City banned them. Hundreds of communities across the country have moratoriums in place. And even where they are technically legal, you will sit in a room full of neighbors who do not want a 40-foot steel pole with a glowing screen outside their window. 4 states have banned billboards entirely. Vermont did it in 1968. Hawaii did it in 1927, 22 years before it was even a state. Alaska's voters overwhelmingly approved a permanent ban in 1998 with language that reads, "Alaska shall forever remain free of billboards." And Maine removed 8,500 of them in the late 1970s. And here is the thing nobody on the pro-billboard side will admit. Those 4 states are doing fine. Tourism is a major industry in every one of them. Businesses advertise through other channels. And when you drive through Vermont or coastal Maine, the absence of billboards is not a void. It is the product. But you are not in Vermont. You are trying to make money. So let us talk about the dark section. The billboard lobby is one of the most effective special interest operations in American politics, and it has been for 60 years. When the Highway Beautification Act was being debated in 1965, the outdoor advertising industry fought it hard enough that the final bill included a compensation requirement that made the law essentially unenforceable. Lyndon Johnson himself, on a taped phone call with a Texas congressman, referred to the billboard lobby as the most selfish, eager group he had ever dealt with, using language that network television at the time could not have broadcast. The industry did not just survive the law that was supposed to regulate it, it captured the law. When the Federal Highway Administration barred digital billboards with intermittent lighting, the billboard industry lobbied hard enough that FHWA reversed its own position in 2007, allowing the very signs its regulations had been designed to prevent. Scenic America, the nonprofit that has spent 40 years fighting billboard proliferation, called the reversal the result of immense pressure from a powerful billboard lobby. In Utah, when a court ruled that Salt Lake City could use eminent domain to remove a troublesome billboard, the billboard company that lost the case did not accept the ruling. It went to the state legislature and got a bill introduced that would prohibit cities from restricting billboard relocation unless they could buy the billboard within 90 days. This is how the industry works. Every time a city tries to exercise local control, the billboard company goes over its head to the State House, where the lobbying budget is larger than any neighborhood association can match. And the compensation game has its own economics. When a state needs to widen a highway and there is a billboard in the way, the billboard company does not get paid for the cost of the steel and concrete. It gets paid for the projected future income stream, which means that a structure that cost $50,000 to build can generate a compensation claim worth many times that. Scenic America has argued that this practice unjustly enriches billboard companies and effectively eliminates cash payments as an affordable option for most cities, counties, and municipalities that want to remove signs. In other words, the government cannot afford to take down what the government cannot afford to take down, and the billboard stays. Let me bring this back to you. So here is your final accounting if you want to own a billboard in the United States. Entry level, buying an existing static board with a permit and a lease somewhere in a small to mid-size market. You are looking at $50,000 to $150,000. It should cash flow immediately if the ad contracts are in place, and the typical expense ratio is about 40%, leaving you 60 cents on every dollar of gross revenue. Mid-level, building a new static board where permits are still available. $50,000 to $200,000 for the structure, plus months of zoning battles, plus a ground lease at 15 to 20% of revenue, plus insurance and maintenance. Payback period, 2 to 5 years if you pick the right location. High-end, building a digital board, $150,000 to $500,000 or more. Higher revenue ceiling because you are rotating multiple advertisers, but higher operating costs, higher build cost, and a longer path to profit. A well-placed digital board in a mid-size market can recoup its investment in 3 to 5 years, and then print money for decades, because the permit it sits on cannot be replicated. And that is the whole game. You are not in the advertising business. You are not in the steel business. You are in the permit business. You own a piece of paper that says the government once agreed to let someone put a sign in this spot, and because the government has since made it nearly impossible for anyone else to get that same permission, Your piece of paper appreciates every year. A billboard is not an advertisement. It is a toll booth on human attention. It sits on someone else's land, uses a public road as its delivery mechanism, and charges businesses for access to the eyeballs that taxpayers paid to put there. The steel costs $50,000. The permit is priceless. And 4 states looked at the whole arrangement and said, no thanks. Every number in this video is from a public filing, an industry trade report, or a federal statute. The out-of-home advertising industry would prefer you think of billboards as a harmless part of the landscape. They are a $9.5 billion business built on artificial scarcity, regulatory capture, and the fact that you cannot install an ad blocker on a highway. If you want to subscribe, this is the part where I ask.